Hi, I'm Sparsh Sinha. I'm a partner at Open Strategy and Design. We are a brand consultancy firm. Can you hear me? We are a brand consultancy firm. We don't make anything. We don't make products. We don't make space. We don't create architecture. What we do is add value by changing the frame through which we look at things. We create meaning by changing the frame through which you look at things. And when we looked at the topic today, when we talk of sustainability, it's an interesting one because as we speak, this year we've seen heat waves in Europe like Europe has never seen. There are cloud bursts happening in Himalayas, with frequency that we've not seen. Wildfires happening across. So all kinds of things are happening. While all of this is happening in Geneva, yesterday, there were policymakers who couldn't agree on the next steps. So obviously, it's a problem that we've not been able to solve. Now, I think a big reason why we've not been able to solve sustainability is because it's a boring thing. It's a boring problem to solve. It's not something that you want to discuss about. It's something that whenever it comes up, it becomes a sermon. There's a whole lot of moral pontification that happens. We are told what not to do, how to behave, how to control, how to live, what to use, what not to use. And the whole narrative is built around resources. It's about, materials that we use. So use paper, not plastic. Use renewables, use electric, right? It revolves around all of that. And what ends up happening is we look at the moment when someone says sustainability, you already know what's coming, right? And it stops there. And probably a big reason why it hasn't worked is because the narrative continues to be around material. Is that a problem? Probably it is, because if you think about it, if you just pull back and look at it, you don't need to look too far to see where the problem lies. So here's a bit of a confession, and I think it's true for all of us here. We believe in recycling, you see someone using plastic, throwing plastic, you feel bad, you feel all enraged, right? And then you go home and order 2 things online which you probably didn't need, right? And that's at the heart of what the problem is. Because somewhere there's a conflict that goes unresolved. And the conflict is this, paradox of green that we talk of, where when we talk of greener growth, we make these gains through smarter choices, but then we consume the savings. Because it's the way the world works. The very idea of growth is about endless consumption. We live in a world which is defined by consumption, right? And when there is that idea of growth, it's not a surprise that green actually becomes a bit of a moral balm. It's a feel-good thing. You do your bit and you feel good and you go home and we'll all lend our voices for it, but nothing will change. Because there's a bigger issue that we are looking at, which probably we are not acknowledging. Here's a fun fact. I don't know how many of you know that this whole idea of carbon footprint, which we're all very conscious about, was actually invented by British Petroleum. It was a very smart campaign which transferred the responsibility and guilt associated with how, with sustainability. They transferred the guilt from the corporations to individuals like you and me, right? Because somewhere all of this has boiled down to just being, feeling good about the whole thing. So are we doomed? If that's the only narrative we have and that's not working, are we doomed? And the question that we wanted to, kind of look at is it really a material problem? Yes, it is. Obviously, it is. Plastic is a problem, or so many things where, if we don't use the right resource, it is a problem. But is it the only problem? Is there where we are kind of getting stuck? And when we pull back and look at it, so there's this song which was made popular by Gary Jules. I don't know how many of you have heard of it. But there are these lines in that song which is, and I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad. The dreams in which I'm dying are the best that I've ever had. And probably that captures the times in which we live. Because somewhere we are talking of a time which is the golden age of abundance. We've got pretty much everything that you want, right? You've got all kinds of coffees, you've got all kinds of things lined up. You can order things now and get it in 2 minutes, right? Everything is there. It is the golden age of abundance. And yet it feels like, we are dying. It's death by abundance that's happening. That is what we feel, when we look at things around. And in many ways, when we, I don't know whether this video will play. Yeah. I'm sure many of you would have seen there's a huge phenomenon in China where a lot of influencers are kind of selling stuff like this. But what you realize is maybe we are on a very high-speed train of hyper-consumerism, and we are all feeling very dizzy. It's making us dizzy. And somewhere, while we are consuming all of this, what is happening is at the heart of it, production is getting easier, cheaper, faster, right? AI is only going to increase the thing. Access is cheaper, things are available to us faster, they reach us faster, right? But what happens with it is also replacement is cheaper. Everything gets to you, it's easy to get stuff, it's easy to access them, it's easy to consume them. But in the process, what happens is meaning also becomes cheaper. What we get, what we have, often does not have the same significance, the same kind of meaning that otherwise it would. So you see a curve where on one hand, production is becoming cheaper, and on the other hand, meaning and significance is also going down, right? Maybe a bit of a dramatic statement to make, but probably we live at a time where we've got loaded carts and empty hearts, We've got a lot of stuff, we've got lots of clothes, we've got everything more, in abundance, but somewhere they don't feel as substantial, they don't feel as significant, right? So there's an interesting story, and I'm running out of short. My time was cut short by half, but I'll try to make it. So there's this interesting story about this nursery school teacher who was facing this problem of Sharpies disappearing, common problem, right? And she came up with an interesting solution. What she did was she named those Sharpies, So one Sharpie was called Mr. Smith, another Mr. Ackerman. Now what happened as a consequence was suddenly when Sharpie would go missing, kids would start looking for it. Because by humanizing it, suddenly it had meaning. Something which is as easy to replace as a Sharpie, right? And I think it's an interesting story because what it tells us is that, there is what we are looking at is a crisis of meaning, right? There's a crisis of meaning. We have got, the more we have, the less things seem to mean, right? And maybe that's the real question on sustainability, where when we talk of material, we talk of thoughtful production, but that's probably one part of it. The other part of it is about meaning and joyful consumption. How do we get more out of what we have? How do we derive more joy out of what we have? And that's a question for all of us as designers, where, it's not just the material part of it which is about sustainability, it's actually the meaning of it, right? What do we derive out of things that we have, which is an interesting question to look at. I had one quick case to share with you, which we have worked on, which is actually a jewelry brand, interesting follow-up from the earlier presentation. It's an Indian brand. I'll try to run through it fast. But it's an interesting one because it's a homegrown story. It's an Indian brand which was launched we incubated this brand with a group called Walking Tree. And the question that we went in looking at was, these guys are B2B diamond guys who wanted to launch their own consumer brand in Europe and US. So it was a very audacious starting point, starting from India, right? And the question that we were looking at was, how do we give jewelry a new meaning? Because we realized that if we played the same game, there's no way we could win. And again, it was there's great material value, but we had to, kind of look at and understand what new meaning could we give jewelry, which would make it, work differently. And we spent a lot of time talking to people. We spent a lot of time. We were parked in Europe, talking to, looking at consumers, talking to experts, looking at, a lot of digital ethnography, looking at culture, what is happening, etc. What we realized was somewhere, the very advantage of precious jewelry is also its curse. It has got high material value, and that actually comes in the way. So what happened was, we realized that actually instead of looking at it from the lens of materiality, which is how do you make something precious, instead of looking at it as precious jewelry, we realized that the opportunity was to dial up the intangible part of it, which is how do you make it more, about precious emotions. And what we ended up creating was the brand was called Unsaid Library, which was, we realized the need and the opportunity that we saw was to make it about personal gifting, where jewelry becomes actually, it became about emotions turned into jewelry, where we studied relationships, we mapped them, and each of those actually became a way of, where we kind of re-looked at what jewelry could mean. So each collection was actually a way of, if there are couples who give each other a lot of space, and that's the source of strength for them, then that became the brief for, creating collections called, parallel lines, for instance, as a metaphor, right? So everything became about that, and then the brand and the way we kind of built the whole thing was coming from this idea of how do you kind of dial that up? So from the packaging to the retail experience, to the way we start building the brand world, because even when you look at it, the way you see people, right? Because this brand is all about relationships and emotions, the world that you see is all about them. You see people as only people who love them would see them. There's an intimate view of them. You're almost, going through them through somebody's personal, kind of album, right? So everything became about that. The way the brand was launched was, all about putting these highly intimate messages out in the public spaces. We got a famous Belgian, artist to create art, commission art on these collections, and those became the way the thing was put out. Now, unfortunately, I have had to rush through a case which, like someone said, is years of work, and there's a whole lot of thing that went through it, so I'm not doing justice to it. But the point is that, we ended up reimagining, just 1 minute. We ended up reimagining what the idea of jewelry is, the meaning of jewelry. We changed everything, every bit of it. Now, I don't know how many of you know this, but this is an Indian brand. Its flagship store is now in Place Vendôme in Paris, which is one of the most sought after, kind of retail destinations. It's selling out of marquee retailers like, Saks Fifth Avenue in New York, Dover Street Market, Printemps in Paris, all of that. It won a Red Dot Award for its jewelry. None of this would have happened if we had gone down the same path and put it out as jewelry. It was only because we started asking the question of what is the new meaning that we could give which would increase its value, which would make people look at it not as jewelry, but as something else, and what that something else could be. So to us, when we talk of sustainability, the question that and the provocation that we want to leave behind is this simple thing, which probably we tend to forget, which is the opposite of love is not hate. It is indifference. And we believe that we are going to see more and more of that in the world we live in. And we have to reclaim that, because that is probably what truly sustainability means, where we value things that we have. We get more out of less, not less out of more. Thank you.